Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the October 4th, 2016 meeting of the Los Gatos Town Council. If you haven't already done so, please silence your devices, and Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Rob Rennie.
Here.
Councilmember Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mariko Sayak.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. If you all please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on our agenda, Mr. Schultz, closed session report.
Yes, good evening. Prior to the regular session, councilmen in closed session to discuss labor negotiations. No action was taken by the council that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. Council town manager reports, starting with council reports and starting with Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Mayor. Since our last regularly scheduled meeting, I have attended on behalf of the town the Highway 85 Advisory Committee, which is a group of elected officials in the West Valley that works with VTA to look for solutions for transportation and traffic issues on the 85 corridor. I don't really have anything to report from that committee. Met with Vice Mayor on the Policy Committee and had the very great pleasure of reading at preschool story time, which was really fun.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I've met with lots of residents on varying subjects that haven't yet come to the council. Things of reporting. I did attend the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Executive Committee meeting, and I also attended with the mayor the ribbon cutting for the Gallery 24 opening, which across from Apple on Santa Cruz, that the Los Gatos Moines Rotary is now taking over from the museums.
Thank you. I attended the unveiling of the award in name of former Mayor Pat O'Loughlin, which will be presented to the town following this weekend's Irish literary event. As Mr. Rennie pointed out, I did the ribbon cutting with him and the chamber for the opening of Gallery 14. Along with the Vice Mayor, I attended and participated in the multicultural event at the Terraces. And also, in addition to Ms. Jensen and Vice Mayor Sayak, was at the Youth Park Day. Ms. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Last Thursday, I attended and participated in the Senior Officials Workshop for All Hazards Preparedness. Went to the League of California Cities quarterly meeting, where we were encouraged to bring board members from our local school districts. Officer Boom and I spoke at the Boys Team Charities annual meeting, and on Friday I was happy to introduce our movie for the year at this year's Screen on the Green, which was Inside Out.
Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I have nothing to report.
Thank you. Manager reports.
Thank you. Just wanted to announce to the council and the community that we are now seeking applications for our boards, committees, and commissions. All the materials are available on our website through our clerk's website. We've got lots of great opportunities, everything from Arts and Culture, Planning Commission, and other boards and committees. The applications are due in November. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is consent items. These items will be acted upon in one motion unless somebody from the council or the community pulls the item from the agenda. I will first look to the council. Does anyone want to pull a consent item from the calendar, from the agenda? Seeing no one, I don't have a card, but does anyone from the community wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Seeing no one coming forward, may I have a motion? Ms. Jensen.
Move approval of the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 7.
Second. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We are now on verbal communications. This is the opportunity for anyone from the community to address us for 3 minutes on any item that is not on our agenda. If you wish to do it, I would ask that you submit a card. A couple of folks already have. First, Maria Risto.
Hi, Maria Risto, 85 Broadway. First of all, Council, I imagine all of you have had an opportunity at some point to walk up and down Broadway while we're under our complete street reconstruction. And what you've probably observed is a small portion of what we live every day. It's dusty, it's noisy, it's disruptive. There are people that can't get to their driveways. You know, at different points we won't have access to our driveways for about 2 weeks. However, we asked for this. We're incredibly appreciative of it. What we didn't anticipate is that, I think starting at the top with Parks and Public Works, the expectation for how the work would be carried out and how we would be treated has been such an amazingly wonderful experience. Every worker from Nichols Consulting and Vanguard and Parks and Public Works has just been exemplary. I've talked to a few of my neighbors and commented that I wanted to call out and thank everybody who's been working on this project. And I got about 15 different comments from my neighbors of positive anecdotes and compliments to a person. Every resident on our street is thrilled with how we've been treated, the care that's been taken. We have residents that are in their 70s. They've had assistance getting their groceries in. We have parents with really young kids who have to get strollers over a barrier where, you know, you might not be able to go, or they're trying to get their kid in for a nap, and the workers have actually paused work to let people get in and out. They took my neighbor's arm today to help her across because the entire street is blocked off. So if you're on the wrong side of the sidewalk, you have to get across. Anyway, if somehow every private contractor in this town could come and talk to Director Morley and find out how you run a project where it's cleaned up every day, where the language is clean, where the attitude is positive, where everybody's treated well, this has set a really high bar. And I just want to publicly say thank you to all of you.
Thank you. I say thank you to you. We actually have a question. Ms. Sayat.
Yes. Ms. Risto, you showed us a copy of all that. Is it possible to give that to our town manager so she can have all that?
I can. I actually printed something up to be displayed at Parks and Public Works, but I can give it to our town manager and make better copies if you like. So it has a list of most of the anecdotes I received, you know, some were redundant, and then a few photos, and I'm putting together kind of a photo breakdown of how the project has gone. But yes, you're welcome.
See no other questions. Mike Brown.
Good evening, Council. My name is Mike Brown with Coldwell Banker in Los Gatos. 2 weeks ago, this new construction project on Hilo was appealed to the Town Council. I have a couple concerns, but I want to do a quick recap. The property was purchased last January. February plans were drawn. March and April was spent with neighbors going through several revisions. In May, the DRC fully approved this project. Mr. Jalalian met all the requirements of the city. 8 days later, Shanna Susik filed an appeal and everything stopped. Now, her name should be very familiar in this chamber as she's also a leader in stopping the North 40 project. Almost 2 months later, the Planning Commission shockingly upheld Shannon's appeal with a 6-1 vote. Valley then was forced to appeal their decision, and 2 weeks ago, it was in your hands. As you recall, the discussion went on for over 2 hours, with neighbors directly across the street and on each side speaking in support of the project. Valley's team gave you several reasons why the Planning Commission was in error. As the vote was getting closer, Councilman Leonardis obviously was torn as to what to do. He asked for a 5-minute recess and was denied by Mayor Spector. Shortly after that, Councilmember Renee made a motion to approve the appeal, and the motion was seconded by Vice Mayor Sayak. At this point, when normal protocol would be to call a vote for the rest of the council, instead the mayor decided to discuss in great length why she was not in favor of approving the project, including there not enough clear reason to say that planning had made an error. Then she called for a vote where the appeal was denied 3-2. Anyone attending that meeting could have come up with several reasons why the Planning Commission had made an error. Here's a couple. One, planning did not have a rendering of the final version of the home to see the compatibility. You did. Planning did not have a soils engineer there to answer the water concerns. You did. Planning was using the 252 as a governing rule, which was stated by Councilmember Jensen. It was not meant to be a rule in the last meeting. 4, they were not including the house next door in the 225 guideline because it's county, but as stated by Council Renee, all homes are included even in county. Are not any one of these reasons enough to say that an error was made? But instead, a vote was quickly made to send it back to the Planning Commission with suggested revisions, taking the burden off your shoulders. No discussion about the months and months of wasted time and money, or the fact that none of you found one broken code or violation. So now we're faced with 2 possible scenarios. I'll be fast. 1, it goes back to planning with the revisions suggested by council. By some miracle, planning approves it, but then Shannon appeals it, as we all know she will do, and we're back here again months from now. Scenario 2, it goes back to planning, but planning stands by the original decision, possibly out of fear of Mrs. Susick, I don't know, but then Valley appeals it, and we're back here again months from now. Either way, we are 3 more months minimum before this project can even begin. That means well over 1 year since the land was purchased, every month thousands of dollars being wasted. It's not right. This is Valley's work, his livelihood. Again, he carefully met all the requirements of the town, but because one woman decided she did not want a 2-story home built on her street, oh wait, she doesn't even live on this street. And believe me, she plans to stop every 2-story project proposed in that area. She told me so to my face.
Mr. Brown, can you wrap it up?
Yeah, and even if she doesn't win, what a powerful message she sends to future builders and neighbors. Watch out, I can shut you down for months. 2 weeks ago after this meeting,
I'm going to shut you down there.
2 weeks ago, there was an Asian man speaking about whales across the world. He went out for 5 minutes. I went and watched, and he was not shut down. I have one more paragraph, please.
Well, let me see first of all if you have any questions. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you. Maybe a question for staff. Mr. Brown mentioned some probable outcomes that could occur. Is it possible that this project could be approved by planning and then not appealed, and then council would never see it again? It sounds like what he's mentioning are all the worst case scenarios. And the way that the meeting that I understand it went, I voted to send it back to planning because they brought forth some items that needed to be changed, or they wanted to change. They voluntarily brought forth items that needed to be changed. And I thought the proper procedure was to send it back to planning so they can approve those changes, as well as some other recommendations that were made by council. But I guess to sum up my point of view here, is it possible that Planning Commission can just say yes and then it does not get appealed and everyone's happy?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir. I have no other cards for verbal communications and see no one coming forward. We will now go on to public hearings. Agenda item 8, public hearing, is to consider amendments to section 2910-150 of chapter 29 of the Los Gatos Town Code to revise the required parking requirements for restaurants. Before I go to staff, we will start with questions of staff, but I've asked the town manager to assume the first question was for a simplified number on this project, and then we can go on to other questions.
So we are prepared with a slide that has the simplified version if you wish, but just to put it on the table, is a base case assuming an 1,800 square foot restaurant downtown without a separate bar. So that would just be a base for illustrative purposes. And if we look at our current regulations to determine the number of parking spaces, our parking ratio is 1 space for every 300 square feet. So if we divide the 1,800 of the total restaurant by the 300, we come up with 6 parking spaces as shown on the slide. And then if you're interested in how we get to seats in our current code, we would take 4 seats per parking space. So that means 4 times 6, which is the number of parking spaces to get the 24 seats. So that's a base case under our current code. And again, we have other variables within our code, but that's just a very simplistic example. And both our economic vitality manager and community development director are available if you want to continue walking through that example, layered on with the Planning Commission recommendation and other approaches. We also have the context of a bigger presentation, which is similar to what was in your desk item that we're also prepared to review with you as well as answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go ahead with other questions of staff if you have any, and then we'll go to the staff report. Other questions of staff? Seeing none, the staff have a report. Thank you.
Good evening, Monica Wren, Economic Vitality Manager. Laurel touched briefly on the kind of holistic presentation tonight. It was provided for you in a desk item earlier today. I'll move through it quickly. It kind of goes in a different order, and I'll try not to skip anything, but try to be not be redundant. So quickly, our background this evening. In October of last year, the council started looking at ways to streamline the business process to make things easier, quicker, maybe less expensive for businesses so that they could move through the process and open quicker. Seating capacities in restaurants was identified as one of those items. The council considered this in December. It went to the Planning Commission in 2 meetings, one in January, one in March, and is back here for you. The commission did recommend decoupling seats and using square footage, and they also recommended increasing the parking requirements for restaurants. So as Laurel touched on, here's what we have existing. All of our square footage in commercial buildings is based on all of our parking is based on square footage. If you're inside the downtown, we calculate your parking at 1 parking space per 300 square feet. If you're outside of the downtown, it's 1 parking space per 235 square feet. Basically, when a business applies for a conditional use permit, we start at that base kind of retail rate, and then we back out the number of seats they can have based on the number of parking spots they have. So this is where the parking assessment district can get tricky. If a property owner has purchased parking spaces in the prior district, then they may have, say, 2 or 3 on file. So you would then add that on top of whatever they have out of square footage and then multiply it to get the number of seats. So looking at seats now, if you look at an 1,800 square foot building, like Laurel said, if you divide that by 300 square feet, you would get 6 parking spaces. So we start there with the restaurant. If they do not have a separate bar, they get 4 seats per space. If they do have a separate bar, they get 3 seats per space. So you can see here some examples of what that would come out at. Outside of downtown, we just have 1 calculation, and that's 3 seats per parking space at that 235. So moving on to the Planning Commission's recommendation to decouple seats, they also asked the council to look at changing the parking requirement for a restaurant. So instead of them being calculated at what everybody else is calculated at, they would now be asked to provide 1 parking space for every 150 square feet. And then they also asked that the council consider a range of square feet once the seats are decoupled, including both 22 and 40. They also asked that we would not exceed fire occupancy. So here are some examples laid out of an 1,800 square foot restaurant. So when we currently calculate the number of seats based on parking, we look at the building as a whole. So if you have 1,800 square feet, we back out the parking spaces, back out the seats. When you move to a square footage, the fire department uses dining area. So you'll start to see a change in the next couple slides when we start to talk about the square footage versus the dining area. So for this one, we have just the difference in the parking. So 150 square feet versus 300 versus 235, the top being the Planning Commission's recommendation and the bottom there being what we currently have. So this is just looking at the parking spaces required. So here we've broken out the seating calculations based on square footage. So this goes back to my comment about dining area versus the total square footage of a building. So looking just at the dining area, taking an 1,800 square foot commercial space, approximately 1,000 square feet would be dining area. The other 800 could be the kitchen, the restrooms, the hallways, things like that. So you see there on the right side of the screen what that comes out as. If you break it down by 1,000 divided by the 40 square feet, you would end up with 25 seats. The 22 square feet would be 45 seats. And then the 15 square feet represents fire occupancy, and that's at 67 square feet. And it's worth commenting that the fire occupancy is not exactly 15 square feet. It's an approximate. They do a calculation based on fixed seats, booths, things like that, but it comes out to approximately 15 square feet. It's also worth noting that, so the fire department's going to regulate the maximum number of occupancy in any restaurant regardless of what the town puts on its provisions. And then any restaurant that they say, okay, you can have an occupancy that's higher than, I think it's 49, that they then require a separate permit from the fire department that has an annual inspection. And again, that happens regardless of our provisions on seats. So here's a snapshot of what Laurel discussed in the beginning, and it kind of uses that 1,800 square foot building that we've been talking about as our base. The first portion representing what we currently have in our code, which is the downtown without a separate bar, showing that there could be 6 parking spaces for that, and at 4 seats each, you'd have 24 seats. So that's a current scenario. Moving to the recommendation from the Planning Commission, this gets a little bit confusing again because we talk about the square footage for seats. We also talk about the square footage for the parking requirement. So looking at the recommendation for the parking, if you divide the 1,800 by 150 square feet, you would come out with 12 parking spaces. Now, should the council adopt that and not decouple the seats, then a restaurant could have 4 seats per 12 spaces, which would give them 48 seats. So that's if you were to just choose the parking piece. If you would also choose to decouple the seats using the square footage, we've showed, again, just another way to calculate out that 40 square feet and the 22 square feet below, showing, again, 25 seats and then the 45 seats. So the final recommendation was the recommendation that staff came with last December was moving to fire occupancy. And really the purpose of us looking at this is that the fire department does already regulate these number of seats. They check in on the seats. It takes the code compliance piece out of the staff's hands. We move to more of a fire, health, and safety. And it also gives businesses the flexibility that as business types change, as seats change, it's a bench, it's a stool, it's a stand-up counter, it's this wide, well, all of that changes with the way shopping and dining changes. The town can be more dynamic and more flexible with those businesses. So these are the 3 basic questions that are before you this evening. Obviously, this is a very complex topic, but to try to break it down for you, we're looking, would the council like to see the town decouple the seats and parking? Should we amend the parking requirements for restaurants to change it from the 300 to 150 or maybe another number? And then how should we regulate restaurant seats if you do recommend that we decouple? And then there's an attachment 6 tonight in your packet that has reference calculations. There are quite a few on that page. We did go ahead and prepare a slide that you can look at. It's very overwhelming from here, but if you want the ability to see it up there or in your packet, it is here this evening. This concludes staff presentation, and of course, we're here for more questions.
Thank you, and let me start with a couple of questions. Of course. I'm going to start with the given where you were talking about currently 1,800 square foot restaurant, and you divided that by 300. which got to requiring 6 parking spaces, correct?
Correct.
And then because you had 6 parking spaces, then you multiplied by 4 seats, and you were allowed 24 seats. So right now, that's what it would be.
Correct.
Now, after that, I didn't keep up with you, but that's why you have questions. Under the recommendation from the Planning Commission, you would start with the 1,800 square feet. You would divide it by their 150 square feet, right?
Correct.
And that would require 12 parking spaces.
Correct.
Which is more parking spaces than we currently require. How many, let's assume for this question that we are looking at seats. How many seats would be allowed under the Planning Commission scenario?
So if we did not decouple, but we moved to that parking, then you would be able to have 48 seats.
And how did you get 48 seats?
Because we multiplied 4
Okay.
seats per parking space.
Okay. Now let's move to the fire code standard and start with an 1,800 square foot restaurant. Then what happens?
So with that, the fire department would look at just the dining area. So we assume for this example that the dining area was 1,000 square feet, just to keep it simple. So then they would look at just that dining area and give you a maximum occupancy that equates to about 1 seat per 15 square feet.
And so that would be how many seats?
67.
All right. So under that scenario, we come up with 67 seats. So we've moved from 24 currently to 48 under the Planning Commission and 67 under the Fire Code.
Correct.
What would the number of parking spaces? Under the Planning Commission, you had 12 spaces, and under current, we have 6 parking spaces. What is the number of parking spaces under the fire scenario?
The fire scenario does not dictate the number of spaces, so that's a separate question for the council to consider.
So there was no recommendation from staff or from the Planning Commission on that issue?
Staff doesn't recommend that we change the parking restrictions at all. The staff's recommendation was to decouple and then to calculate the seats based on fire occupancy and not amend the parking requirements based on square footage.
Okay, so hang in there with me. So if we're not amending that and we have 67 seats or people, is it seats or people under the fire?
It would be both under this circumstance because their maximum occupancy for that dining room, whether you're standing, sitting, would be 67.
All right, so under that 67 seat or people, whatever, how many parking spaces? You're saying we're going to continue to utilize the current scenario, and what would that translate to?
6 spaces.
And how did you get, what was the math you did? Looks like it's about 10, but what was the math you did?
I went back up to that top line. That's the 1,800 divided by 300.
So you would just use our current math, but there would be, rather than 24 people currently, there would be 67 people.
Yes. So currently that restaurant with 24 seats can have 67 people in it. We just tell them they can't have more than 25 actual chairs, but we don't say you can't have the additional 43 people standing.
Other questions? Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So I'm trying to understand the implications of the Planning Commission recommendation to switch to 150 square feet per space. Currently, if we have a restaurant at 1,800 square feet, they're required to have 6 parking spaces either on site or have bought into the parking district. So the Planning Commission now is doubling that. So all of a sudden they need 12 parking spaces. And, you know, as you know, we don't have more land downtown. So what does that mean for restaurant? Now they're all out of compliance. And what does that mean if they want to sell and a new restaurant wants to come in?
So the restaurants that are existing now could continue to exist the way that they do. However, they would be a non-conforming use. So if they were to sit vacant for 6 months, then they would have to come into the new parking requirements. If somebody wanted to change a retail space to a restaurant space, they would have to be able to double the number of parking spaces they currently have. So by leaving it at 300, then a business has the ability to become a restaurant, become a retail, become a personal service, and flip back and forth. It would be extremely difficult in your scenario downtown for retail to now become a restaurant, because it's almost impossible to find that many extra spaces, even through parking agreements or whatever else it is.
And if I could follow on, I think that implication also, so you said if a restaurant goes out of business and it stays empty for 6 months, now they have to somehow have twice as many parking spaces, which they aren't going to get unless they somehow can park on the roof. So, and this is based on square footage, so that means if somebody wants to fill that space, they have to now cut it in half and use, what, half for storage and the other half can be a restaurant?
Or they'd have to convert it back to a retail space or something that could be parked at that 300 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? See none? Thank you. We now have public testimony. I do not have any cards. Does anyone wish to address us on this agenda item 8? If you wish, come on up and you can turn in your card after you speak if you want. Again, anyone wishing to address us, please submit a card. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Hey, Council members. I'm Alex Holt. I'm the owner of Holt's Restaurant. I live in Los Gatos, 515 Blossom Hill Road. I am also the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and I think this is a very interesting topic, and I like the direction we're going in. I believe I was one of the people that you guys listened to maybe a year ago, maybe 6 months ago, 8 months ago, regarding this topic. That why have these rules that are pretty strict if we're not going to follow them? That was kind of my punchline then, and the direction that the Planning Commission is going in seems to make a lot of sense. For the only part that doesn't make any sense at all is to change it to 150 square feet instead of 300, because of the simple question that Rob Rennie just asked as well. I mean, restaurants are turning over pretty often. That's pretty obvious just here in Los Gatos. So now, a new restaurant is going to come in instead of California Cafe, and somehow they're going to double their parking when there is no parking. I mean, it's kind of going to turn into where no restaurants can come into Los Gatos and fill empty restaurants. So I own a restaurant, and that would be great for competition being less, but it doesn't make any sense to me to go that direction. I do think it's a really good idea to let the fire code dictate how many seats there's going to be, for the simple reason is that that's how it is run right now anyways. People are going to put as many seats as they can to stay in business, and no one is really checking it. And the fire code comes, the fire guy comes, knock on the door once a year, sometimes more, and tells you need to do this, you need to do that, and it's a very serious thing, and you pay $50 to make sure that all your stuff is up to code. And I think that's a really good process. And to say something that, you can only have 48 seats, and you get checked once when you're first about to open the restaurant, and then everyone just kind of knows that 6 months later you can do whatever you want because it's based on complaints, is not really a functioning system, and that's just a brutally honest feedback. I think decoupling makes total sense, and I think sticking to the 300 like it is now is really the only way to do it, so that it would be an easy transition to go from one restaurant to another as it turns over, natural selection. However, we do have a parking problem, and there could be other creative ways to make up for the shortcomings on the parking problems. I just think that we need to simplify, making it easier to do business in Los Gatos, not harder.
Thank you. Let me go back and see if I'm holding on to your math. We have a hypothetical 1,800 square foot restaurant. You are saying keep the 300 square feet, so that means we would need 6 parking spaces? Is that what you're...
Yes, that is what it's currently is at, and
Okay.
I don't know if that is, a good number. I don't know if that makes sense, but we are where we are, and those spaces, it's not going to change. And I think the problematic, like I explained, like Rob Rennie's question, would be to change it, and then now what do we do when new restaurants want to come in?
Okay, so we keep the 300 square feet. We end up with a requirement of 6 parking spaces, but then we go to the fire code, which, according to staff, results in 67 seats. And so that's what you're advocating?
In a way, yes. The only difference that I think it's very important to make clear is that currently no restaurant would actually add seats by making this change. Every restaurant is already running its optimum amount of seats, and about 80% of all businesses in Los Gatos is out of compliance right now.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. I have no other cards. I am now closing the public testimony portion of this hearing and looking to council for questions, comments, or motion. Mr. Rennie.
Sorry.
Really?
So question for staff. I'm trying to understand, still get my arm around the 40 square feet per seat gives 25 seats. So you're saying a typical 1,800 square foot restaurant now allows 24 seats. With this 40 square foot per seat, they would be allowed 25 seats because we don't consider the whole restaurant dining area?
That's correct.
So that sounds like it's not more restrictive. It sounds the same, but the Planning Commission testimony, I think Mr. Polson said several times that it would be more restrictive at 40 square feet per seat. So I'm trying to understand why it's different all of a sudden.
It's just because of this hypothetical. It really depends on what the dining area is. As a town, we don't dictate what someone's dining area is. We don't measure it. We just base it 100% on the number of parking spaces they have. So that 1 per 40 square feet would fluctuate. Maybe if it would, it would depend based on how big their actual dining area was. So 40 could actually become more restrictive. It could become, just about even. We had that conversation at the Planning Commission. I think one of the planning commissioners even said, well, what's the number that brings it the closest to what it is now? We can just change it to that. And I believe that's where the 40 square feet started to kind of become part of their conversation.
If I could follow on.
Sure.
So that means it's really dependent on this ratio, which is almost, it's a little more than half is dining area of a restaurant. Is that typical, or is this just a crazy made-up one? How do I know how real this is? I have no way to ground myself.
We don't actually have any way of knowing either. Some restaurants who prepare certain types of culinary experiences are going to have different types of kitchens. Maybe a quick turn, or somebody who has 4 or 5 dishes for the night can work in a much smaller ratio. Somebody who offers small bites or something like that, we would still call them a restaurant, but they can work with much less space. So really the dining area is based on the type of restaurant it is, the type of operation it is, what the ADA compliance is when they build. There's so many variables that it's hard for us to stand up here and guess. And I think that's really, from a staff perspective, where we were looking at this high level, is if we start to look at these 40, 22, or these square footages that are now based on, let's just say the dining area is 642 square feet, staff is actually doing more calculations and trying to explain more rules to the restaurants, and it becomes even more convoluted, in my opinion.
If I could just follow up, one more time. So I'm trying to again think this through, and you've thought about this a lot more than I have. So I'm thinking a restaurant like Opa, where the kitchen is really kind of in the room. So I'm thinking they've got a lot more seating area because their kitchen isn't somewhere else. It's actually part of the seating area. So they would be allowed more seats versus somebody that put their kitchen kind of behind walls and there was a lot of space back there. Am I correct in figuring this out?
Yeah, you're correct. Because the fire department really looks at it for the access, the safety. If there were an emergency and you had to get out, that's what they're really looking for, is where are the seats placed? What's the ingress and egress? How can people move through the building safely?
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Jensen.
Comments and a motion? I'm going to try. I appreciate the Planning Commission working through this, and the questions that we've had tonight and the confusion that we have about the chart is indicative of the difficulty that there is in looking at parking in the downtown and in the town on a piecemeal basis. I think this probably has come to us too early. What we need to be doing, and what I think I said, and looking back at the minutes from the town council meeting when we discussed this, is we need to be looking at parking comprehensively in the downtown. So we need to be looking at shared parking agreements. We need to assess how our valet parking ordinance is working or not. We need to explore the possibility of employee parking permits along with valet. We need to look at the status of the configuration of the parking garage that we just discussed at our last meeting for downtown. And we need to look at alternative transportation and promotion of that, for example, Uber or perhaps shuttle buses. That would all alleviate traffic issues and parking issues downtown. By taking one little problem and trying to fix one aspect of it and maybe creating a worse problem, because what we've heard from the businesses, or what I've heard from the businesses, is please give us clear, concise rules where we know what to expect, that apply across the board and that are equally enforceable. And so decoupling and giving it a generalized measure, for example, fire, square footage, whatever it may be, makes sense if we have a plan, comprehensive plan for parking. So my motion is, given those items that I've discussed that I know are under consideration, I've left one out, which is definition of various businesses that we have downtown. So it's a restaurant. Is it a high turnover restaurant? Is it a fine dining restaurant? Is it some other kind of restaurant which have different rules? Is it a specialty retail which sells food? And we've had this come up. Do I have a seat? Do I not have a seat? These are all issues that the policy committee is trying to work through. And by coming forward with this one thing, I don't think it's ripe for our consideration this way. It's a good start. I continue to be supportive of the notion of decoupling just because it makes it clearer and easier to enforce and for business owners to understand. But my motion would be to not take an action on this tonight, return the question with the input of the Planning Commission, thank you very much, and the business owners to the Policy Committee to look at a holistic kind of view of shared parking, decoupling, valet parking, employee parking permits, downtown parking garage, and alternative transportation. So that's my motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Mr. Leonardis.
I will second that motion.
I have a question of staff. The motion has appeal. I'm looking at the agenda item and its amendments to Section 2910-150 of Chapter 29. Does that mean that how does looking at policy going to coordinate with revising a section and chapter of our town code?
So the item before you is a recommendation on an ordinance change, but you have many other options that fit within this agenda item. So this motion is consistent with the agenda item listed on your agenda.
Thank you. Ms. Jensen.
And my motion started out by indicating that my motion was that we not take an action on this item before us tonight, that being the code amendment. And I would anticipate that if this motion was successful, that the policy committee would come forward with ideas for the council that may or may not necessitate code changes.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I'll just comment. I also think there's some merit to the motion. I'm and the motion really gets to the Planning Commission recommendation, which I'm not at all sure is correct. I couldn't support that recommendation without, as Councilwoman Jensen brought up, a much thorough thought process and look at the big picture. I could, I think, support the staff recommendation because it's fairly simple, and as Mr. Holt said, it's really just making official what's happening now. So I'm not particularly opposed to the staff recommendation, but I think I can support Ms. Jensen's motion also.
Right, I'm going to be supporting the motion, probably for reasons different, maybe, than other folks have stated. First of all, I want to commend the Planning Commission. They did a lot of work, and it's my sense that the direction that they were given by the town council may have not been that clear, or maybe the information they were provided wasn't that clear, because they had a lot of smart people doing a lot of work. The difficulty I have with the recommendation of the Planning Commission and also the staff recommendation is they do not make sense to me from a real life perspective. We know, well, on the one hand, we have businesses saying nobody's complying with your ordinances. Then you have input that we don't have enough parking spaces. Then you have a recommendation that says we're going to have 67 seats and 6 parking spaces. That means that we're either going to have to be really short of parking spaces, and to the extent that we're getting shorter, that means it's not only going to impact restaurants, but it's also going to impact retail and service. So right now, the recommendation by the commission does not make sense to me. The recommendation using the fire code as suggested by staff does not make sense to me. By sense meaning it doesn't seem reasonable. I will say that one of the Planning Commission's recommendations was the decoupling, and that did make sense, but only in this idea that right now people don't necessarily sit in a chair. They may be standing, they may have couches. So that decoupling made sense to me. Policy Committee, if you get that to you. But otherwise, this needs more work. Further discussion. Ms. Sayak.
Okay, I'll go ahead and support the motion just because I think there is merit in looking at the correlation between the square footage and the parking spaces. But just in general, I do at this point believe that we should decouple the parking and the seats. I personally am in favor of using the fire code. I think, as we've heard over the testimony from several business owners, each business model is unique and each restaurant is unique, and the ability for us to just step back and allow each business owner to determine how many seats best suits their business model is not an area that I would like to get into. And so having a maximum of a fire code that ensures fire access is the safest priority, and then allowing the business owner to then choose what is comfortable given the environment that they're choosing is the route I would like to proceed. But I do agree that there needs some reality check between the number of people we're envisioning to partake in that restaurant with the adequate number of seats. And I do think that the motion speaks to the ability for us to look at alternatives such as there's just more options available to us nowadays than the traditional one parking space per 4 seats. And I think that's worth exploring. So I'll support the motion.
And following up on that, I totally agree, because if we use the fire code, we're looking at 6 parking spaces for 67 seats. That does not make sense to me. However, if you had these other modes of transportation which people are using and which the maker of the motion encompassed in her motion, Uber, shuttles, whatever, that could make a metric like that make sense. But for me, not now. Further discussion. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Planning Commission. Other business, agenda item 9. Receive a status report on the entertainment policy adopted by Town Council on June 21st, 2016. Staff report.
Good evening, Mayor. I'll give a brief staff report. This agenda item is a status report on the entertainment policy adopted by Town Council in June, approximately 4 months ago. The entertainment policy allows for businesses to offer entertainment before 10 p.m. so long as they are in compliance with our noise ordinance, and allows for entertainment after 10 p.m. through a late night entertainment permit process. The policy took effect immediately for those businesses without a conditional use permit that didn't prohibit entertainment. Any business with a prohibition against entertainment had to come in and request a modification to their CUP before they could have entertainment. Since the adoption of the policy, we have had no complaints from dispatch or code compliance due to entertainment before 10 p.m. We had one complaint for after 10 p.m. from a business that had a CUP that didn't prohibit entertainment, but they also did not have a late night entertainment permit. We spoke with the owner, and we have not received any other further complaints from that business. And with that, I'll open up for any questions. We're here to answer any and provide you with the status report of where we are right now.
Ms. Jensen.
I have 2 questions. First question on page 2 of the staff report. The 4th paragraph under discussion says staff is finalizing the late night entertainment permit and process consistent with policy. That to me means that we don't even have a permit process yet, so one could not come in and ask for a permit yet. Am I right?
They could come in and ask for one. We just are trying to figure out the best way to route it. So we only have one person who has asked, and we're working with them currently to get that approved.
Okay, so we are reviewing a policy that's really not in effect yet because we don't have a permit process.
That's correct.
Okay. And my second question is that any business with a conditional use permit is completely unaffected by this entertainment policy, correct? Their conditional use permit is independently reviewed under the conditional use permit process, correct?
Correct.
So it is irrelevant, this entertainment policy is irrelevant to a review of a CUP, but for the fact that a business can come in and ask to review it.
So I think there's 3 different, as we said in the staff report, there's 3 different types of CUPs for businesses. If they're completely silent on whether they can or cannot have entertainment, then they would fall under this policy, and before 10 p.m., obviously you have to comply with the noise ordinance, and if they decided they wanted it afterwards, they'd have to come in and obtain that late night entertainment permit. The other one is where it said, some of them said you shall comply when a policy is passed, so those have to comply with this policy if they want entertainment. The other ones were those ones that specifically said thou shalt not have entertainment, and those are the ones where they have to come in and ask for a modification before they can have entertainment.
Ms. Jensen.
Okay. And I'm looking at the staff report. There's 35 of those businesses that have a CUP that's potentially affected by this policy?
That's correct.
And of those, 5 have indicated that perhaps they want to do something. 1 has actually filed a modification request?
Correct.
And that 1 for the modification request is going through the process that it would go through regardless of whether this entertainment policy is in place or not.
Yes, with the one caveat that they're under the modification that council approved where they only have to open that single condition in their use permit.
Right, but that modification, that single modification, which is the entertainment portion of it, they're now allowed to ask for that, but the review is exactly the same as it would be if this policy didn't exist.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So my question is, we'll take this example of the one that's reviewing it. What is the cost to them to do the review to change their CUP for this one item?
It's approximately $8,000.
Is that because that's what it costs? That's complete cost recovery. That's what it costs us. Okay, seems a little.
It's actually closer to 9. It's 75% of the total cost of a conditional use permit.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, this is a public hearing. And so if anyone wants to address us, please fill in a card. And I have one card, Michael Verga.
Hi, I'm Mike Verga. I reside at 40.
Would you please bring the, yes, thank you.
Hi, my name's Mike Verga. I reside at 46 Broadway Avenue. And I want to make a few comments about the new, recently adopted entertainment policy. This new entertainment policy, as it relates to me and the Broadway neighborhood, is that it has opened the door for, in my situation, in my neighborhood, an outdoor concert venue, specifically the Toll House. The Toll House is capable of holding 150 to 200 guests in their courtyard, and this is in a residential neighborhood. This is not hyperbole. This is exactly what the Toll House would be allowed to do 7 days a week up till 10 p.m. And the only restriction would be their decibel limits. And I'd like to speak a little bit about decibel limits. To put the decibel limits in perspective, as a former fire captain and fire inspector, a sound or alarm that is 15 decibels above ambient is loud enough to meet the requirement as a fire alarm. The ambient sound levels in the Broadway neighborhood in the evenings are between 40 and 45 decibels. This policy would allow up to 56 decibels. That is a difference that would qualify it as a fire alarm. And the chance of that amplified sound staying at 56 decibels or lower in the neighborhood, in my opinion, is essentially zero. That would assume that every band member, every DJ, every party guest at a wedding, concert, reception, or event would never turn up the volume. When you have 150 guests in an outdoor courtyard partying, somebody is going to turn up the volume. How much sound levels go above ambient is very important in a residential area. Some municipalities restrict entertainment noise levels to only 5 decibels above ambient. But to me, here's the real bottom line. The reality of this policy, how outdoor amplified sound would play out in a Los Gatos neighborhood, specifically the Toll House courtyard, has already occurred. In the summer of 2011, the Toll House held outdoor entertainment. They were to be restricted by the noise ordinance. Decibel meters were placed in the neighborhood. At times, they were within the 56 decibel limit. But outdoors, many factors are in play. Amplified sound outdoors is influenced by weather, wind, temperature, humidity, and the DJ band members are influenced by the size and nature of the crowd. More often than not, we could hear the amplified sound clearly throughout the neighborhood. And this when the Toll House knew they were being scrutinized. The Broadway neighborhood has lived through this outdoor entertainment situation before. It was unacceptable. The entertainment policy needs to be revised, and outdoor entertainment by right, in my opinion, needs to be eliminated.
All right, let's have you wrap it up, see if you have any questions. Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Verga. I have one other card so far, Alex Holt.
All right, me again. This is more as the president of the Chamber of Commerce. We've been receiving very positive feedback from a lot of local merchants wanting to create more vibrancy in Los Gatos, and are very happy with this step in this direction, being able to give something to their clientele, like having a guitar player play in a restaurant, a piano in a bar area, and such. A lot of people have been very positive to this, and I think this is kind of standard in a lot of areas where, you know, I feel like Los Gatos has a lot of rules that we have to follow. And to what was just discussed against the Toll House, if I'm not mistaken, Toll House is an enclosed area, and they have a hotel So they're obviously going to get, if they play too loud music, they're going to get complaints for their guests very much sooner than it's going to bother houses in the surrounding area. That's just my opinion. I think that giving every business the same opportunity should be something we should focus on in terms of the whole CUP process. I know Terry Hope, that's been in business for 25 plus years with the roasting company. She have some CUP detail that says that she cannot have music, so now she would have to pay $8,000 to put a guitar player at 2 p.m. on an afternoon to please her crowd. That doesn't make sense to me. And if I remember correctly, when we started this process, I was here for that meeting. It was discussed. One of the council members actually said that there should not be a full review of the CUP and an $8,000 bill attached to it, that this should be to any business. I could be wrong, but I would definitely encourage staff to maybe look through those old tapes or minutes and see, because I feel like it was discussed that it would not have to be a 6-month-long process and a $9,000 bill to be able to have a guitar player in your coffee shop or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you. No one has questions.
Perfect. Can I add one quick comment?
You may.
So just the restaurant and coffee and that type of business, there is about 8 to 10% margins. So $9,000, you need to make about $90,000 in sales. So any business that would now like to play little music, a guitar or something like that in a place, they would have to justify a $90,000 increase in business. That's clearly not going to happen unless you bring Eurosmith or Bryan Adams or something like that, which is clearly not going to happen.
It's going to be too loud. Thank you.
True.
Gillian Verga? Or Jillian?
My name is Jillian Verg. I live at 46 Broadway. That was my husband that spoke a minute ago. I agree with everything he said. And I would like to bring some suggestions for the entertainment policy itself. I've been thinking about this a lot, researching it and talking to people about it in the last few days. So I have a lot of suggestions, and I'm going to do my best to get them in 3 minutes. So first thing I did was I have some recommended language for the policy. I changed the name to just an entertainment policy rather than just late night entertainment, because it does seem to apply to all entertainment. And as in my understanding is that the purpose is not just for late night entertainment, but actually to allow entertainment during the day. I added some language. This is red. Sorry, this is the edited part. I added some language about the purpose that I pulled from the town's website. It's pretty high level. But I also think that a purpose, the fact that we want to preserve a small town character and take into consideration the mix of residential and commercial space, those kinds of things, I think, do set the tone. I did not make changes to the section about late night entertainment, but I added a section called Guidelines for Entertainment Before 10 p.m. because, again, I feel like that's what a lot of the discussion is about, and it merits its own section. I didn't put these in just as random suggestions. These are actually based on lengthy discussions with some of my neighbors who have dealt with noise issues for many, many years. And I've heard some great case stories about what works and what doesn't work. One thing in particular I put in is that it's up to the business to monitor the noise levels. It should not be the residents calling to complain that monitors those. Okay, the second area that I had suggestions was on the complaints area. The biggest thing here is we need some alternate method of complaint if you need immediate attention. If your child is studying on Sunday night, and there's a lot of noise. Waiting until you get a response Monday isn't going to help you, and maybe that's a call to the police. But it should explain, if this is a time when you need immediate attention, how should you get that? And I think the fines should be higher. If they are following the guidelines in the policy, they won't be getting complaints from citizens. So, and $100 is, quite frankly, is a flea bite to someone like the Toll House. And then my final point is on the activity of the town staff. I read the staff report, and it seems to me that there are many, many businesses that do not have CUPs that prohibit entertainment, and those are great opportunities to try out this policy. And why on earth they used the Toll House as their sample, I do not know. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So obviously I couldn't read what you had up there. You're going to send us that?
I'll send you a copy, yeah.
And so my question really...
Mr. Rennie, hold on. If you could give it to staff, and if staff could distribute it, make copies at some point and distribute it to council. Mr. Rennie.
Okay, thank you. So what I... Wait till she's paying attention. So my question was, it sound like you wrote this as if the regulations would be for the Toll House. So would the things you wrote in there, would those be adequate for the Toll House to have their CUP modified?
The Toll House has a CUP that prohibits entertainment, so it would not fall under the umbrella of this policy. And then the CUP actually has two other conditions other than the entertainment condition in their CUP that they are currently violating, and I don't feel comfortable with giving them the entertainment condition when they're violating other conditions on their CUP.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? See none, thank you. Now, if you want to speak on this item, please give us a card. Catherine Summers. And if I didn't say your last name right, it's because I can't read your writing.
Sorry, no, it's Summers. Hi, I'm Catherine Summers, the Executive Director of the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Just two quick things. Being the Executive Director, I talk to a lot of business owners and restaurant owners and whatnot. And most agree that this town is known for its music, and that's what makes this place vibrant and why people come here. For example, we have the jazz in the plaza and the music in the park that everybody loves. I think what we're limiting ourselves to by not opening the entertainment policy to more businesses is that our late night music is just what's in the bars. And so people come and they listen to that. But where's the jazz and where's the folk music and where's all the other really cool types of music that could be at We Olive and could be at the Toll House and could be at the Los Gatos Roasting Company? I think we kind of want to widen our horizons and not just have it that late night club music that we have at some of the bars. That's one thing. The other is, I think the Toll House, which I don't really think that was the topic of discussion here, they're a hotel, though, that is going to go out of business if they cannot offer their clients music out on that courtyard. The courtyard is enclosed. It's a really beautiful space. I've been there for a number of occasions. And music, a jazz quartet out on that courtyard would be lovely. I think, not to talk to the woman who was just up here before, I don't think on Sunday nights they are going to be selling it to a wild, rambunctious group that is going to have a big party on a Sunday night. And if they do, I think they will limit it to a 10 p.m. I think they're very willing to abide by whatever rules come their way just so that they can offer clients a little more flexibility in what they can do on their property. Lastly, on a personal note, I live steps away from Testarossa Winery, and they have music, as most of you know, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights. And I, just from a personal point of view, I love the music and wind and humidity and everything else that came up. I mean, it changes the direction that the sound goes at any given moment. And that's kind of what makes Los Gatos, I think, what it is, and just have that music coming across the hillsides and through the trees. And my kids kind of like it. Sometimes it's a little bit loud, but you just kind of live with it because we're all in this town together. That's all I have to say.
Questions? Ms. Sayak.
So, Ms. Summers, thank you for testifying today. I just want to make sure I understand. So the toll house was brought up, and that's a whole separate process that we're going to have to look into through their own CUP. But of the entertainment policy that is before us now, are the businesses within your chamber, do they find it easier? Do they find it that it's pretty self-explanatory, other than those that have to go through a specific CUP revision?
Yes.
Has it been?
They've loved it. We have, had a couple of meetings and been overjoyed of the fact that entertainment policy was loosened a little, and so people could have music until 10 p.m., those that do not have a CUP. So I think it was, and in fact, I think our members, in fact, looked at us and thought, oh, you guys have helped us out and you've loosened a little bit, a few of the stipulations. I do agree with Mayor Spector and with the woman who was up here before. I think you could do more with policy in terms of what the ramifications are if you don't abide by the rules. And I think there could be, something maybe changed in that fashion so that maybe the ticket was higher, or, it's not just a slap on the hand the first time. Maybe you get a fine the first time and then the fine is more. I don't know what that looks like, but I think actually everybody would be fine with that so long as they could still have music until 10 p.m.
Thank you. Anyone wants to address us, please submit a card. Steve Hauk.
Good evening, Council. I appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you this evening. I wasn't planning on speaking, but I heard a comment earlier that it begs a question, and that is, I'd like to know how the Council feels about, this gentleman from the Commerce mentioned that the coffee roasting company, for example, they cannot have any kind of entertainment, and I wonder how you feel about the other, say, 12 coffee shops in town, that because they don't have a limitation, they can, and they can do whatever they want now. Just kind of trying to figure out how that's fair, that the roasting company would have to pay $8,000 or $9,000 to get permission to do what somebody else doesn't even have in a description of the CUP. It just doesn't seem right. So I'm wondering how you've considered that part of the equation, allowing businesses that have a description that says they cannot do this and they cannot do that and they cannot do this and they cannot do that, and then all of a sudden it's opened up to the whole town, for all the people that don't have any limitations. They can do whatever they want till 10 p.m., inside, outside. So as far as the guidelines and the regulations, that's obviously up to you. I have no input. I trust your judgment on that one, but I would like to know how you feel about it. Seems to be a pretty big issue right now. And I would like to add that I'm glad that it's being discussed after about 50 years. It's refreshing.
Hasn't been that long.
Oh, come on.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Oh, so at what point would I hear a response from my question?
What we're doing this evening is getting information.
Okay.
So that's what we will do now. So the answer to your question is I don't know.
Okay. Hopefully it won't be another 20 years, right?
I have no other cards. Seeing no one coming forward, I will now close the public testimony portion of the hearing. And then just to kick this off, this is not an agenda item where we will be making a decision. I brought it forward because we have a new entertainment policy, and I just want us to, take look at where we are and where we might be going. I was actually focusing more in my own mind on enforcement rather than the policy for entertainment itself. And we have two components of enforcement. One is if you have a CUP, and one if you don't have a CUP. Now, I know there have been statements that the CUP is not affected by the fact that we have this policy, but the way it's worked so far is that it has, in the sense that if someone is coming in for a CUP modification on some non-entertainment issue, that applicant, it is suggested to that applicant that he or she might want to consider adding entertainment. So in that sense, it is impacting it. It also impacts it in the sense that even if the CUP holder is not coming in for some other thing, that CUP holder might be suggested to it that it come in now because now is a good time to get entertainment more than it used to be. So there is an overlay between the entertainment policy and the CUP. With regard to a CUP, the difficulty is if a business is granted an entertainment CUP, then removing that right is tantamount to impossible. And as I always say, the only CUP that has been revoked in my tenure in this town and on this council was a bar that was found by the ABC to repeatedly have bugs in its liquor. That was the only one. It has to be pretty bad. So what we may want to consider is, rather than amending the CUP, having a policy apply, a policy application which might actually address a couple of issues that have come up. Easier to get, easier to lose. With regard to the policy enforcement, put aside the CUP. The policy enforcement is no different than the enforcement of any other noise issue, whether it's leaf blowers or lawn mowers or music. It's the same thing. And it has a very long, I consider, difficult process. And that long, difficult process is you have to contact the compliance officer. And if you get a hold of the compliance officer, he has to go out to the business when it happens to be allegedly violating the rules and has to get a measurement. And from that measurement, then they get a citation. And the citations, there could be multiple citations. At first, they're just, please don't do it anymore. And then they move into money, and then they move into increased money, and I don't know what it goes from something like $100 to $500. And the chances of it going to its ultimate cessation, which is taking that person, entity, business to court, is, again, almost non-existent. So those are just issues that I see surrounding both the permit, any noise permit, including this one, and the CUPs. Ms. Jensen.
Thank you. I understand that what we're doing tonight is simply receiving a status report. The mayor brought up issues that were thoroughly vetted and discussed by the council when we adopted this entertainment policy a mere 3 months ago. We don't yet have a permit process in place. We had a report from staff that we've not gotten any complaints except for a business that was violating its CUP, ironically. So I think that we are prematurely taking a new look at something that the council voted to put in place. We haven't really had an opportunity to see how it works. Any business coming forward with a CUP is going to undergo the same rigorous scrutiny that every other business comes through, the toll house included. There is no guarantee in the entertainment policy that one must grant a CUP exception or change, nor must one turn it down. The code compliance that we've put in place, even before we had an entertainment policy, was already successful with our late night code compliance officer, which the council has kept in place. So I think we're looking at this policy prematurely. I think the mayor is bringing up issues that may or may not arise, but which were considered by the council when we put this policy in place. I think we need to give it more time. We usually don't actually review things at all. It's different for us to do that. And we normally do that on a 6-month or 1-year basis. So it seems to me it would be appropriate to look at it at that point, but certainly not to change it tonight.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So I think I have 2 questions for staff. Mr. Holt was remembering that I was the one that was concerned about what the cost of changing the CUPs were. And my recollection was we talked about some way to reduce the cost by maybe doing several of them at once. And I don't know if that's still on your plan. Your response back was we only got 1 person interested, so that maybe that means they're not really interested, or they didn't, or did we not really offer it to them? So that's kind of the first question. And the second question is, I guess I'm hoping that the Toll House CUP is $9,000 because they're a hotel. It's more expensive. Would it be less expensive for something like the roasting company to go through the process, because they obviously have a much different financial ability to do that, and I don't think it's fair that only the big guys get a chance to do it.
So Monica did do a significant outreach to the CUP holders, and at this point, and we offered the group processing, and at this point we do not have any takers, so we definitely tried, but that's still an option. So if we get multiple businesses who are interested, we're definitely here to do that. We're happy to do time and materials, but I think if we have an issue that is that brings a lot of community interest, and we have a continuance at a planning commission, it's possible that we might hit the $8,000 or $9,000 limit anyway, just given the way our process works for the CUP. So we're happy to do time and materials, but we also don't want to surprise a business that may find that they didn't get a hearing the first time around, that it was actually continued.
Okay, so I think that's good, and it's good that the chamber representatives are hearing it, so maybe we let them run with that idea. And I'm not sure if they knew that it was a possibility before, so thank you.
Other questions? See none. Thank you all for community for your input and council for your input. On to the next agenda item. Agenda item 10.
Thank you.
Authorize the town manager to send a letter to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments in support of the preferred scenario for Plan Bay Area 2040.
Thank you, Mayor.
Staff report.
Thank you. So the item before you is an opportunity for our town to provide comment to the regional agencies, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and the Association for Bay Area Governments. It is important that the town participate in regional planning, because these are the agencies that in very few years will be determining the regional housing needs allocation for all the cities and counties within our region. And so we definitely want to make sure that we have a voice when later decisions come forward. The good news is that our early comments were listened to. So this is actually a letter of support, which really wasn't expected when we first suggested putting this on your agenda for consideration, but because they did listen to us and have come up with numbers that are consistent with our general plan, we are recommending moving forward with a letter asking them to please hold with our numbers as they continue their planning process. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Ms. Prevedi, I have a question. I'm looking at your letter, and I believe that the sentence I'm looking at is, this scenario projects a total of 2,250 new jobs and 500 new housing units for Los Gatos by the year 2040. I believe you said that it is not the general plan, the body of the general plan, but the associated EIR. Can you clarify that for me?
That's correct. In the town's case, the actual quantities for the 2020 plan are actually articulated in the EIR, in the Environmental Impact Report, and that was critical so we could run traffic studies and all the other technical studies that supported that. But basically, those are the quantities that the new general plan or the existing general plan would essentially generate. And as I've mentioned, if and when we modify the general plan in the future, we might want to consider a text amendment so that way they're actually memorialized in the document itself in addition to the environmental document.
Let me follow up with another question. I do not actually recall the numbers in the EIR or the EIR that was a part of the general plan. I have a little bit of a concern of sending out a letter saying that Los Gatos accepts 2,250 new jobs and 500 new homes. Just any input on that?
Again, this is a draft letter and is open to any modifications that you might want to bring forward. I think the main point is consistency within our general plan. So clearly there might be a little bit of room, and we could certainly phrase it differently so that way it's clearly within our planning horizon to have an order of magnitude of development as stated, as opposed to saying that we somehow accept it. But we are, in fact, planning for it.
Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Ms. Pravetti, is there a way that we could, as a community, consider transferring some of our allocation to a neighboring community that perhaps has the ability to absorb it? When I looked at these numbers, I said, okay, well, we saw what happened with the North 40 and the resistance to housing coming to the community. And I look at these numbers and they look a lot bigger. And I was thinking, okay, perhaps maybe we could tell San Jose we'll give you some money if you take on our housing allocations.
I think we'll probably have those conversations in a couple of years when we're discussing our new housing methodology. We are still in communication with the other cities within our county, and we may be able to develop a methodology with those other cities to see if we can do some sharing or spreading, and we'll have to see how that goes. But this is currently in our general plan, so we've identified land uses that could yield if applications were approved.
Thank you.
Ms. Jensen?
I guess two questions. One is, I take it that this letter is simply a prelude for future discussions and that it is not the end of the discussion, and that we anticipate that we're going to be working with MTC, ABAG, et cetera, for many months and years to come to figure out exactly how we're going to calculate our fair share, correct?
That's correct, and that's why I think it's important that we take the opportunity that's before us. I think most communities probably, if they were in our place, they wouldn't even have a communication. They would say, oh, well, this looks good, we'll leave it be. But I think strategically it keeps us in the game if we at least provide some comment.
Follow up?
Yes.
So I applaud that because I know that in past years, Los Gatos has not taken a proactive stance and it has come back to haunt us. So I think we need to get in there early and often. My other question was with respect to Mr. Leonardis' question. I know that there are communities in the Bay Area that pool together for their RENA. I can't remember, I think up the peninsula, that have essentially coalitions. And is Los Gatos considering or has been talking to other communities about entering into that kind of coalition?
Correct. With the Cities Association leadership, I am serving on a subcommittee where we are exploring what that kind of coalition would look like for our county, and that work is underway.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So again, two questions. I think I may be missing some understanding here because you're saying 200 or 500 new housing units for Los Gatos, but I'm not sure I understand the time frame. Is that between now and 2040? Because I know our housing element says 619 by 2023, so I'm not understanding how that number is lower unless that's after the 619. That's the first question.
Yeah, so that's a great question because the planning horizon for the Plan Bay Area is 2040. So it's a much longer planning horizon than both our housing element and our general plan.
So how is our number lower than our housing element number?
Those are their forecasted numbers, and if they want to give us a lower number, we'll take it.
So that they're forecasting we're not going to meet our housing element.
I don't think they're making any judgment on our housing element. I think they came up with this through a mathematical exercise, as I understand it.
If I could follow up, I'm still not quite sure I'm understanding. So there's two sets of numbers. One you're saying is 500 new homes, and the other is 1,600 new homes. What's the difference between those? I thought the 500 was something that we are supporting or driving.
So they're estimating for their plan that they would only ask Los Gatos to plan for 500. Our general plan identifies more than that. So long as their number is within our general plan, it seems that we should be comfortable with the Plan Bay Area forecast.
Which is 500. So my second question maybe is not completely in line then, is whether we looked at it, my question is whether we looked at it from a jobs housing balance, because the numbers there look like they make our jobs housing balance look even worse. And that's something we used to talk about a lot. I think some of the original RENA allocations were based on it. And even before they started talking about RENA allocations, it was something we talked about quite a bit. If a city's adding jobs, where are those people driving from? And the idea is, for less traffic, better, greenhouse gas reduction, put jobs close to housing. So this sort of looks like we're making it worse.
Well, again, I can't speak to how MTC and ABAG came up with their numbers, since it was a very complicated mathematical formula that they used. I think we do need to be mindful of jobs housing. The projected number of jobs is close to what's in our general plan. And again, we know our own housing element has more than the 500 housing units, so we know we have adequately planned for more housing. So if we do attract those jobs, we are keeping pace.
Thank you.
Ms. Sayak.
Thank you. So, Ms. Pravetti, I know we've talked a lot about this. Have you or Director Paulson been able to actually look at the parcel maps and how they forecasted this, and were they realistic? I mean, are they actually placing the parcels on parcels that we have identified through our own housing element and general plan?
They're using a parcel geography that's known as the traffic analysis zone, which is not really a parcel at all. It's aggregations of large blocks of our community. And in general, it looks like the geographic distribution it makes general sense, but it's hard to really nail it down to, say, the intersection of Los Gatos Boulevard and Shannon. But in that general area, for example, they've reduced the amount of housing in that particular area. And they've also acknowledged that we have some lower density areas within our community. So it's within an order of magnitude.
Okay, so they're not necessarily looking at parcels that may be in the hillsides and putting higher densities. I mean, they're generally aligned with what we would look at from a zoning.
Yes, and we did try to get the parcel level because we understood that that's actually how they did the analysis, but all we got was the larger set.
And then my second question is, understanding this goes to 2040, at what point do we then have to revise our own general plan and EIR to keep pace with their own projections?
So that's a great question. So SB 375, Senate Bill 375, which asks the regional agencies to look at how we can reduce greenhouse gases by aligning land use and transportation planning at the regional level, is not a mandate to modify general plans. So we can consider our general plan whenever the council believes it's time to do so. Typically, communities do that essentially on a 10-year cycle or so, 10 or 12 years. So in a few years, we may want to start thinking about what that process would look like and what the issues are. Within that time frame, they're going to need to do another Plan Bay Area because they're on a much shorter cycle than we are, and we'll see where they are at that point with projections.
One more question, and then I'll have all the people who want to testify on this item come forward. I think it is it's either mandatory or a good idea that this letter be sent from the town. I think it is mandatory for us to get engaged and involved in the process so that we're not just left out there with a surprise at the end. My question is, again, I'm a little bit uncomfortable buying into these numbers, and is there any way that we can soften our commitment without violating honesty?
Sure. I don't have the words right at the tip of my tongue, but I can see what we can say in terms of at least consistency with our general plan and encourage them to continue to respect that as a parameter as they move forward, something to that effect.
Further discussion? Questions? Let's see, are you looking for a motion on this one?
Yes, please.
All right. I am looking for Ms. Jensen.
I would move that we authorize our town manager to send a letter to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission that's along the lines of the draft that we have received, however, that rather than contain specific numbers where possible, that we indicate that we would support numbers that are consistent with our general plan projections and planning, and that we emphasize that we look forward to working with them on any future modifications to the plan.
Second discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Agenda item 11, discuss and adopt the policy committee's recommendation for a legislative policy. Staff report.
Thank you. In your packet this evening is a streamlined process whereby the town would be able to take positions on state or federal legislation. This gives us an opportunity to follow and track what's happening, and as well be able to comment as appropriate in terms of our position, whether it be oppose, support, or amend. And what we're looking at is a process that identifies what our legislative principles are, local control being chief among them, and then essentially the town manager working with the town attorney would identify potential legislation. We would send a note of what our analysis would be. If there are council members who would like it to be agendized, we could have a full discussion with public input. But if the council agrees, we can then move forward and get our letter going. So it's a much faster process. I think this past legislative year, we were watching a couple of bills in particular, and our mayor did provide comment on behalf of our town, but this provides a broader process that would allow all council members to engage.
Questions of staff? Seeing none. I don't have any cards. Does anybody want to address us on this issue? Seeing no one coming forward, I'll look to the council for a motion. Ms. Jensen.
That's comment and I suppose a motion. The discussion at the policy committee with the vice mayor and myself was that we wanted to be able to have something in place that allowed us to quickly and with a reference be able to address bills that came up as they came up rather than be in a reactive kind of mode. And we were looking at the time we discussed this, the bill that was potentially going to the governor regarding eliminating local control over land use decisions. And we wanted to give the town the ability to comment on those. And I know that Councilman Rennie through the League of California Cities will get notice of particular items that we might want to comment on. And what we were trying to do was identify those issues where we would want to comment, those things that did affect local control or affected policies that had been adopted by the town that we wanted to comment on. And this gave us a way to do that and allowed the council to see those before they went out. So that's why we're recommending it to the council. And if you want a motion with that, I can make a motion, which is to adopt the policies committee recommendation for the legislative policy.
I'm going to second that, and I'm specifically looking at the bottom of page 2 of 3 and top of page 3 of 3. which I understand to be the recommendation in total. Is that correct? All right, so we have a motion and a second. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Policy Committee. Thank you, Council, staff, community. Meeting's adjourned.